Up to almost 200 attendees.
Yeah, hello to all the members of the public. Just to let everyone know, we're going to give the committee another minute to join, and we'll get started soon once we're all settled in the back end with committee membership and staff. Thanks for being patient. To the members of the public who are still joining, just to announce this again, we are waiting for the committee members and some staff to join, so just give us a couple minutes and we'll get started. Thanks for your patience.
Okay, I think we have everyone here, and I will briefly start and then turn it over to my co-chair and then to the president of the National Academy of Medicine, Dr. Dzau. So I'm Helene Gayle, and I'm president and CEO of the Chicago Community Trust and the committee co-chair for this committee. And along with myself and Dr. Faggy, who will say a few words, we're just pleased to welcome everyone to this open session. I'll say a little bit more about the open session, but just pleased to have everyone here. And we're really encouraged by the response and the interest in this. And I think everyone knows how critically important this issue is. And so we're just pleased to have the opportunity to have this open hearing, open session, hear from the sponsors of this study, and be able to share this information. So Bill, if you want to just say a few words and then we'll turn it over to Victor.
Thank you, Helene. I would also like to thank everybody for being part of this, for the interest you're showing. I thank NIH and CDC for giving us both this opportunity and this burden. An author by the name of A.J. Jacobs is always trying for self-improvement. And one year he read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica from beginning to end. And when he finished, he wrote about it, and he said his conclusion after doing that was that he now hesitated to ever come to a conclusion, but that the one thing that he did learn for certain was to avoid certainty. And now NIH and CDC are asking us for conclusions and certainty, and we're going to do the best we can. This is a great committee, and I'm so impressed with what the National Academy has done in preparing for it, what they put together. So with this committee and all of their background, I'm hoping that we can actually satisfy you with conclusions and as much certainty as possible. And I especially hope that we can provide you with creative, moral, common sense at its best recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor.
Oh, well, first, thank you for coming to this first meeting. This Committee on Equitable Allocation of Vaccine for SARS-CoV-2. I'd like to begin by thanking the committee co-chairs Bill Foege and Helene Gayle for leading this really important study. Members of the committee for agreeing to commit their time and expertise to this significant work. You know, I think we've assembled an exceptional committee with extensive experience and deep expertise. This is a big assignment, and they have a very tight timeline to do this. I want to thank NIH and CDC, particularly Francis Collins, who's with us, and Robert Redfield for asking the NAM, National Academy of Medicine, to undertake this important work. Also, I want to thank the staff, particularly Andy Pope, Rose Martinez, and Lisa Brown. Tremendous effort in pulling this together in a very tight, short period of time. In June, I got a call from Francis. Let's do it fast. He's calling on behalf of NIH and CDC and asked us to convene a committee to develop a framework. This was 1 to 2 months. And then I had a couple of conversations with Robert Redfield to clarify and define the statement of task. So, Francis, I hope you'll be pleased. In a matter of weeks, the team worked on the statement of tasks, assembled the committee. We are holding our first meeting today. I think it speaks a lot to the commitment and efficiency of the work of my team. So all of you know the issue, and you're going to hear a lot more from Francis and others and Jay Butler. So I won't belabor the point except to say that even the best optimistic time frame, the experts are saying we may have a vaccine by the end of the year, early next year. But despite that, we all know that doses at the beginning will be in limited supply, and there won't be enough for everyone. And that's why it's so important to have a framework that will help determine who should get a vaccine first, who's next, and it should be based on science, public health, social factors, and equity. I won't go through the statement of tasks because I'm sure it will be discussed more detail, except to say this effort must be transparent, science-based, and objective. And its recommendation must be trusted by the public. I think that's what we do well at the National Academies. As you know, we were chartered years ago by Abraham Lincoln and Congress and as an independent organization to advise the nation. And over the years, our work has always been seen as evidence-based, independent, and trustworthy. You know that we have a tight time frame. And so the work plan of the committee will be discussed, but we will hope to release a discussion draft of the framework for public comment by the end of August, early September, hold a public workshop to get feedback from external stakeholders, and expect that our final recommendations will be done and released in late September, early October. And so with that short time frame, we have a lot of work to do. So the committee is planning to meet every week. So much for your summer, guys and girls. And I want to thank your committee for this very important work for the nation. And once again, thank Francis and Robert for asking us to do the work. And I see Carrie there too. Thank you, Carrie, for giving us the assignment. Thank you.
Great. And before I turn it over to our co-sponsors to talk a bit about their perspective and the charge of the committee, just a few things that I need to mention about this as a public session. And so just to note that this is an open, on the record information gathering session. This is the first of several planned committee meetings. This is our first, as Victor said. Some of these meetings will include public sessions where we'll have the opportunity to hear from many experts in the field and receive public testimony. We will use this in our committee deliberations. And so these sessions are incredibly important. As is mentioned, the final version of the report is expected to be released early this fall. And this will be part of our thorough deliberations. And so very useful to have this open session. And this one particularly is important because it gives us the opportunity to hear from the sponsors of this study directly and to have them present to the committee the charge as they see it. So as we go back into our deliberations, we can take these your information and your perspective in mind. Because we are a little bit late, I'm not going to go around and have everybody introduce themselves. The members of the committee are publicly recorded, and we're very pleased, as everyone has said, to have this caliber of and range of experiences represented for this very important task. So without further ado, I think I will turn it over to our sponsors, and I will start with Dr. Collins.
Well, thank you, Helene, and thank you and Bill for being willing to co-chair this remarkably talented, experienced group. And thanks to all the members of this group. Many of you I know, some I don't, but I really appreciate your willingness to, as was just said, have the rest of your summer ruined by the need to get deeply engaged in a series of very important deliberations, and to do so in a fashion that requires this kind of intensity, because time is moving along with great speed, and we want it to move with great speed. Certainly none of us 7 or 8 months ago would imagine that the year 2020 would take on the unique characteristics that it has. None of us would have imagined we'd be having this kind of conversation, gathering people together on very short notice to ask the Venerable National Academy of Medicine to come up with some very important, deeply significant recommendations about access to a vaccine, to a virus that nobody expected would be anywhere near the headlines a few months back, and yet now dominates practically all of our news media and all of our daily discourse. And it should. This is, for everybody's clear understanding, probably the most significant global pandemic the world has seen in a century. And it has certainly caused already enormous suffering, premature death, economic stresses that are just almost too severe to be able to fully get your head around, and affected virtually now almost every country of the world. Here in the United States, unfortunately, we continue to see devastation from this particular coronavirus, now with something like 70,000 new cases every day, a little more than 1,000 deaths each day for the last 3 days. And what we thought might have been an opportunity to bring the number of cases down to a baseline after the tragedies in New York and New Jersey, Connecticut, failed to actually reach that baseline and instead stayed at a higher level and then started back up again. No one could say this is really the second wave. It's still part of the first wave that didn't wave itself on out. And we now as a country have a big challenge to put into place all of those important public health measures to try to see if we can bring that curve down again. Meanwhile, waiting for the vaccines that we are all counting on to have a chance to bring us back to something like normalcy in 2021. As the NIH director for the last 11 years, and before that as the Genome Institute director, I've never seen the kind of all hands on deck effort that has been inspired by this pandemic. And the way in which this has brought around the same table people with resources and skills and talents and creativity from every sector is exactly what you would want to see in a time like this, where every day counts. And I will tell you, many of us are devoting 24/7 efforts to three different parts of the solution here. One is diagnostics, to come up with better ways to find people who are infected quickly and get them into isolation. Obviously, we've done a lot of development of diagnostics, but we still are not in a circumstance where we have quick turnaround tests the way we need. Another is therapeutics, and we're working hard on that as well with new clinical trials coming along just in the next couple of weeks to test out such things as immunomodulators, anticoagulants, and monoclonal antibodies. But we're here today to talk about vaccines. There are going to be, in the next 3 months, at least 4 vaccines that are going to move into phase 3 testing. Each one of those, in order to be assessed whether it's safe and effective, will need to be tested against about 30,000 participants in a 1-to-1 ratio with a placebo. And of course, those trials will need to be done in communities where the virus is actively spreading. Otherwise, you won't be able to know whether the vaccine is working. So much of this is going to be happening in the Southeast and the West. And we will want to, as quickly as possible, enroll a very diverse group of participants in those trials. And some of us are working very hard to do that community engagement to be sure that this is a diverse group of participants, because we're going to want to know, how did the vaccine work in these various high-risk groups? Older people, people with chronic diseases, African Americans, Latinx, Native Americans, all of whom we know have taken a higher burden from this disease than others. And that is one of those aspects of this that is also both particularly sharp in its image and particularly troubling. That is, if you needed any more evidence that health disparities are a major problem in this country, this has shown that to us by the way in which it has fallen heavily on the shoulders of those same groups who have been suffering from health disparities. So all of us working as fast as we can to try to get these vaccines through their initial trials and then out to the phase 3 trials are also imagining that this is going to work. And I think everyone, even the very careful Tony Fauci, is now willing to say with cautious optimism that by the end of 2020, we are likely to have one or more of these vaccines, which is showing safety and efficacy. It's a good thing that the science behind them is diverse. They're not all built upon the same technology, and that's intentional. You may also know, because of Operation Warp Speed, which is a way in which government has brought multiple agencies together, along with a lot of resources, that all of these vaccines are also being funded by taxpayers' money for manufacturing, not waiting to find out the results of those trials, but doing the manufacturing ahead of time so that if a particular vaccine does in fact turn out to be safe and effective, we will already have tens of millions of doses ready to begin to allocate. That hasn't really been done before. It is potentially a big risk financially, because any of those doses that are manufactured for a vaccine that fails will basically be lost and will have to be thrown away at considerable cost. But still, given the way in which this particular pandemic is causing so much devastation, this still seems like a small investment for the benefit that it might result in. All of that leads us to the reason that you're being called in to help us here. And this is a conversation that Bob Redfield and I have had now over the course of several weeks, along with others who are looking at the situation, such as Moncef Slaoui, who is the CEO of Operation Warp Speed, and Janet Woodcock. Basically, we need to be prepared for success. because success won't necessarily mean the simplest outcome, where you have a vaccine that does look like it's working, but you don't have enough doses for everybody in the world on day one. So how do we decide how to do that? Now, let me say the CDC, through their advisory committee on immunization practices, and you're going to hear about that shortly from Dr. Romero, has the abilities and the responsibilities when these things are happening right in front of them to be able to begin to make those recommendations about priorities for vaccine distribution. And so when that does happen, that vaccine is approved, as we all hope it will be later this year, ACIP will be in the position to understand what needs to happen and to make those recommendations. But it seemed to everybody that we spoke to that even before that, it would be particularly helpful to have some high-level discussion about this amongst experts who represented a wide range of experience in public health, in vaccine science, and in bioethics to try to paint a broad picture of what the foundational principles ought to be for this kind of priority setting. And that's what we're asking you all to do. Bob Redfield and I really are counting on you all to think about this and come forward with that kind of framework that the ACIP then subsequently can utilize. Because this is going to be controversial. Not everybody's going to like the answer. There will be many people who feel that they should have been at the top of the list, and not everybody can be. The kinds of things that I'm sure you will want to look at in terms of the sorts of priorities to consider, certainly those highest risk would be people who are, for medical reasons, particularly likely to be vulnerable. I will say, because of the way in which we've seen how this has affected particular populations, that ought to be a very serious consideration in terms of the health disparity consequences. Other individuals at high risk for chronic illnesses, healthcare workers, certainly essential industries, perhaps the military. You have to think about all of those things factoring in here. One that we shouldn't forget is the people who took part in clinical trials and got the placebo. I think probably we owe them, as a consequence of their participation in the trial, some special priority in terms of access to the vaccine if it's proven to be successful. Think about geographic distribution in terms of the risks, because at such time that this vaccine is approved, I don't know what we will be seeing at that point in the US or in the rest of the world. Where will the outbreaks be the most severe? And obviously that ought to be factored into the decision making. I also don't know at that point where we have this decision, how many doses will be available. Will it be 10 million? Will it be 100 million? It'd be sort of helpful to have some indexing there. And I think what that means is we want to see you set forward some priorities where we could kind of figure out how far down that list could we go, depending on how many doses we have. That makes it sound simpler than it is, but that's the sort of idea. So I'm counting on the wise folks who are gathered here now and who are going to get to know each other really well over the next 7 meetings after this to put forward that kind of guidance that we are all in need of. I do appreciate this timetable. It's really tight, but I think we need to have that framework well in advance of when we actually have a vaccine approved in front of us. It'll be so much easier, I think, to have this conversation be substantive instead of getting down into some sort of nitty-gritty cul-de-sac if we're talking about it in a general sense without having to make a decision that day about what's going to happen tomorrow with the distribution of how many doses to who. So appreciate the fact that we are asking you to do this on a very rapid turnaround. And Victor initially was a little shocked, I think, with the proposal of this kind of timetable when Kerry Wolonetz and I brought it to him. And I should have said, Kerry Wolonetz has been my right arm here in terms of figuring out how we might get this forward. But I think if you can, as been projected in this timetable, come forward with draft proposals by the end of August, then hold this public discussion. You really want to hear what the public thinks, do some additional modifications and have the final recommendations by the last day of September. That would be a really good set of timing to be able to adhere to. So with that, I would like now to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Dr. Bob Redfield of CDC, who obviously is in a position here to have an enormous amount of responsibility and interest in what happens with vaccine distribution. And perhaps Bob would like to share some of his thoughts about this as well. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Francis, and thank you for the collaboration and partnership in sponsoring this and very important committee. Today, our nation and our world are in the grips of the single greatest public health threat that we've had in a century. I also want to thank the members of the committee, obviously Bill and Helene and the other members for their service and willingness to take on what we believe to be an urgent task laid before them. While this virus hasn't been equitable, as it has impacted the population, communities, and ethics groups across our nation, we must ensure that our response to it is. We must make every effort to ensure not only that any vaccine is allocated in an equitable fashion, but also that the public actually sees that it's equitable, fair, and transparent. Your charge is clear and significant, and I know your efforts will take us a step closer to ending the current pandemic and improving health equity in our nation. Rapid, successful development and distribution of the vaccine depends on the combined power and unique insights, both from the private and the public sectors. From partnerships like these come scientific innovation that brings about true biological solutions. For its part, CDC stands ready to assist in achieving the nation's COVID-19 vaccination coverage goals by building on our long-standing immunization infrastructure. This infrastructure connects public health departments, healthcare providers, community groups, and others in a network designed to efficiently reach the population. During an emergency such as this one, this proven system can be scaled up to expedite, manage, and distribute almost 9 million doses of vaccine. CDC also has a significant role to play in increasing vaccine confidence and is implementing a new strategic framework called Vaccinate with Confidence to strengthen the public trust in vaccines and prevent vaccine-preventable disease outbreaks. We will continue to build on this investment of our immunization programs as we prepare the nation's public health systems and private sectors to disseminate the COVID-19 vaccine. In closing, I want to thank the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine and National Academy of Medicine for appointing this committee. The work that comes out of it will greatly assist the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices in its planning for the allocation of vaccines against COVID and inform the development of our national and local guidelines. Most importantly, it will help lessen the health disparities, which are such a cruel feature of this disease. Again, I want to thank each of you for your commitment to serve, and we look forward to the counsel and advice that you have to give us. Thank you.
Well, thank both of you, and I think we really appreciate the collegial effort between the two agencies on this study. And I think we have a few minutes for any questions from the committee before we move on to our next speaker. So if there are any questions from the committee, I open up the floor. It may be that you were so incredibly clear and the enormity of this task is just weighing on us. So, and we haven't gotten any chats or raised hands, but I think your comments were incredibly clear, and we will continue to wrestle with this scope and the issues that you raised. So we really appreciate both of your comments and again, the focus on this issue and thinking about how we can be thinking about this in a timely manner for all the reasons that both of you mentioned. So Thank you. And I will now introduce our next speaker. And Dr. Collins alluded to how this study and the task of ACIP relate to each other. So, we look forward to hearing more about that from your perspective. So I turn the floor over to Dr. Jose Romero, who is the chair of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices.
Thank you, and good afternoon. First, let me begin by thanking the co-chairs of the Committee for Equitable Allocation of Vaccine for Novel Coronavirus, as well as the president of the National Academy of Medicine for this invitation to address your committee and your group. By way of introduction, I am Jose Romero. I am the current chair of the ACIP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices of the CDC. Outside of this role, I am the interim secretary of health for Arkansas, the state of Arkansas, and I'm a professor of pediatrics and pediatric infectious diseases at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. Over the next few minutes, I hope to provide the committee with an overview of the ACIP, the composition of the committee, its role to the CDC and HHS, and the composition and goals of the ACIP's COVID-19 vaccine work group, as well as the activities that have been undertaken to date and in the future. As many of you know, the ACIP was established in 1964 and has given advice and guidance to the CDC and HHS for over 60 years, for nearly 60 years, excuse me. The role of the ACIP is to provide evidence and guidance to the director of the CDC and the HHS secretary on the most effective means to prevent vaccine-preventable diseases in the civilian population of the United States. The committee is external to the federal government and comprised of citizens of the United States. Relevant to each vaccine or vaccine-related issue, the ACIP advises on population groups or circumstances in where the vaccines may be advisable. Deliberations by the ACIP include consideration of disease epidemiology, burden of disease, vaccine efficacy, vaccine effectiveness, vaccine safety, quality of any evidence reviewed, economic analysis, and implementation issues. Paramount for the ACIP is vaccine safety and transparency of deliberations and arrival at recommendations. With reference to implementation issues, I wish to make clear that the ACIP does not issue specific recommendations or directives regarding implementation. That is in the purview of other organizations. The ACIP is comprised of 15 voting members, which include an official chair and an official vice chair, and the membership of the other members consists of individuals with expertise in various disciplines related to vaccines and vaccinology. They include, but are not limited to, medicine, pediatrics, family practice, obstetrics and gynecology, infectious diseases, public health, nursing, immunology, vaccine research and policy. And specifically, there is a designated ACIP member who represents the public. In addition to the voting members, the group is comprised of 8 ex officio members from other government agencies involved in immunization, as well as representatives, liaisons from 31 liaison organizations that have broad involvement with immunization. The full body of the ACIP meets quarterly in open public meetings with specific time set aside for public comment to deliberate the issues related to vaccine policy. The work of the ACIP is carried out by work groups designed and designated to address specific vaccines or vaccine issues. Each work group is comprised of at least 2 ACIP voting members, CDC leads and subject matter experts, as well as ex officio members and consultants. Recommendations arising from the work group are arrived at through the use of the GRADE mechanism, that is grading of recommendations, assessment, development, and evaluation, as well as the use of the evidence to recommendations framework. The current ACIP COVID-19 work group consists of 2 CDC code leads, 4 ACIP voting members, of which I am a member of, 6 ex officio government members, 17 liaison members, and 8 consultants. The role of the ACIP's COVID-19 work group is the collection, analysis, and preparation of COVID-19 vaccine-related information for presentation, discussion, and voting by the full 15-member committee, ACIP committee. Its goal is to prepare for implementation of safe and effective COVID-19 vaccines in the United States and the use of evidence-based approaches to guide COVID-19 vaccination policy that will protect the public and reduce the impact of COVID-19 in the US population. The ACIP COVID-19 vaccine work group held its first meeting on April 14th of this year. Initially, these were held as bi-weekly meetings until May 17th, at which time the frequency of the work group meetings was changed to weekly. The work group activities since that time have included review and safety of the immunogenicity data available for COVID-19 vaccines, review of the epidemiology of COVID-19 disease, identification of potential targets for population vaccination, discussion of potential vaccination prioritization plans in the event of insufficient early vaccine supply, identification of areas where additional data are needed to inform vaccine recommendations, and discussions toward the development of COVID-19 vaccine policy options that the ACIP may consider for recommendation. In addition to the weekly group meetings, a full 9-hour ACIP web-based open public meeting was held on June 21st. During that time, the work group presented its, at that time, up to the moment findings and information to the full ACIP committee, the associated organizations, and the public. From that time forward, the ACIP's work group has continued to meet on a weekly basis. A second 9-hour ACIP web-based open public meeting is scheduled to occur next week on July 29th. Following this meeting, the work group will continue its weekly meetings with full open public meetings open for comment scheduled on August 26th and September 22nd. A regularly scheduled ACIP meeting in October will also be held. The ACIP looks forward to collaborating with your committee to arrive at COVID-19 vaccine options for the prevention and control of the disease in the US civilian population. The recommendations from your committee members that are of very high caliber and range will help to inform the committee as to a path forward to achieve its goal. Although the ACIP does not issue recommendations for countries outside of the United States, we also await recommendations coming from your group to assist policymakers in other countries in planning for equitable allocation of COVID-19 vaccines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and really appreciate your perspective on how this committee can be helpful related to what you're doing with ACIP. So it's very useful. Reed Tuckson, I think you had a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Romero. Excellent presentation. Can you review one more time the level of independence of your ACIP and your reports? When they are released, do they go through a process of review or are you able to have autonomy in terms of what you conclude and how you present those conclusions to the public?
So I would say we have relative autonomy. Our report and recommendation is submitted to the director of the CDC, who either approves or rejects the recommendations made by the committee. The final recommendations are reached from the work group to the full committee by discussion and vote at one of its regularly scheduled full meetings.
Let me ask a follow-up question, please. When you make a report to the director, and if it is not approved, is your report that is not approved available to the public?
I will have to say that, to my knowledge, that has never occurred. And I can't answer as to what has happened in that case. That's a new frontier should it occur, sir.
Thank you.
Let me just also say this. Our recommendations are held during a public meeting. So the transcript of that meeting is available, as well as today, the videotape of that meeting. So one way or another, the public would have access to our recommendations, even if rejected.
Thank you.
Dr. Reingold, or Reingold?
Jose, hi, nice to see you.
Good to see you, sir.
This question may be premature, but I was aware of the fact that ACIP had developed a working group for a COVID vaccine. What would be interesting or important to know is, and maybe Dr. Redfield or Dr. Collins can speak to this, in prior committees I've been on, there's generally been a fair separation between the committee's work and its members and the sponsors. But here it would seem to me that we would all benefit from close collaboration with your working group, so that we don't potentially come up with different recommendations, which would be perplexing and challenging for physicians and providers and the public. So do you have any thoughts about how we can work with your working group in a way that's permissible under the rules of the National Academies?
I do not see any problem in our groups having liaisons where we could, if amenable to your group, share one of our members to your meetings and listen in and offer opinions as they relate from our committee, and have someone from your committee sit as a liaison within our group. Now, I know there's a process for becoming a liaison organization, but I think that process can be expedited or can be eliminated given the importance and urgency of this topic.
Yeah, I might just ask somebody from National Academies to discuss whether that would be permissible, or what would be the restrictions, or what might be the best way to have some sort of interaction between the two committees.
Gail, this is Victor Dzau. We've done it a number of times. And the past experience is mainly with international organization. For example, there's a Human Genome Project which Alta is part of from the WHO, and we at National Academies are doing also the human genome editing, particularly looking at germline editing. We have a liaison in which staff actually attends both meetings, with the exception that during private deliberation, the staff usually is not part of a deep discussion, or at least attend through those. Now, with ACIP, sounds like most of the meetings are open. Ours would be, as you can imagine, closed. So we're going to have to navigate this more carefully, thinking how to do this. But it's possible to do this. And maybe, if I can ask maybe Lauren and others to see if they can give us a little more guidance.
If I may offer clarification, Mr. President. So our work group meetings are closed. They are not public meetings. It is only the full meeting that is public. So just to make sure that is clarified, if I did not make that clear.
Thank you.
And Victor, this is Redfield. I just want to underscore why Francis and I feel that your committee and your participation is so important, as our advisory committee for immunization practices, which is also importantly transparent. Our goal here is to have transparency. Transparency so that the American public has confidence in the recommendations we have. So I think the more that we can interact in a way that just underscores that transparency, because I'm sure there'll be many people that will have different points of view. When I deal with the vaccine resistance that we have right now for measles vaccines and others, we're knee deep in it. So I really hope that there's a spirit, and I'm confident there will be, of openness and transparency, so the American public can have confidence in the collaborative decisions that are made.
Bob, you have our commitment to do so.
Yeah, I want to underscore that as well, that I'm really glad about the nature of the conversation we're having right now about the opportunity for ACIP and this National Academy panel to interact effectively and collaboratively with each other by whatever means you figure out is okay to do so. But I do think it is such an important question and such a sensitive issue for the American public. It is full of all kinds of complexities. It does also extend beyond our own country to other parts of the world. It seems like this is a moment to have all of the deep thinkers and all of the institutional gravitas that can be brought to bear on this put into this moment of opportunity. And again, the National Academy, because of its absolutely clear position as representing the most thoughtful, objective, scientific perspective, I think will add a critical layer of credibility and thoughtfulness to the way in which this all plays out. But in no way should that be seen as undercutting the long experience of the ACIP, which, as you heard from Dr. Romero, is well positioned to make really significant conclusions of their own. So to the extent that this can be worked out to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts, that's my dream.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I see that there was a question from a reporter that asked whether you said that the meetings are held behind a question about the transparency. And so just to clarify, our public meetings and our focus on openness in our public meetings. Victor, I don't know if you want to say something about that. I think there might have been a misunderstanding of open and closed meetings. So,
Sure. Lauren, Sharon, do you want to speak to that?
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that. We do have both open and closed meetings with our National Academies committees. Everything is publicly posted on our website so that the public has information relating to those meetings. So that information will be available to the public on the project's website. Being able to have closed deliberative meetings is something that the Academies has done for a long time. It's part of the way that we operate, and all the information relating to all of the meetings that they have are available.
and I would just add to that, that this is the way that all of these studies are done. There is nothing different about this study from the way National Academy studies are done. So just to make sure that nobody feels like we're doing something that is different and more closed than other studies. We are using the protocol that is part of the study process for National Academies of Medicine. I don't see any other questions. I don't know if any of the committee has any further questions of any three of our speakers. I think this has been a very, very helpful discussion, and particularly to get the support of our co-sponsors for the figuring out the best way to have the kind of collaboration that is in all of our best interests. So really appreciate that. If not, then we can wrap up this portion of our committee meeting today, the open and public meeting, and really want to again thank all three of you for coming. I think it helps us a lot to understand directly from you your perspectives. So really appreciate you spending the time with us, and we will all do our best to deliver high quality product on time, and hopefully in a way that really makes a difference on this critically important issue. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Much appreciated. We'll be watching with intense interest.
Thank you.
Thanks again. Thanks a lot. God bless you all.
Thank you. And we'll see the rest of the committee in 5 minutes.